right, everyone, welcome back to our third episode of What's the Hype? I'm joined by Jim Cedrel, our golf course superintendent.
Episode 3.
Episode 3, we're moving right along. So we're going to talk about mostly golf things, get Jim's knowledge. Jim is so knowledgeable when it comes to turf conditions, turf health, to taking care of this golf course. And we're going to do a deep dive into a lot of different things, from green speed to the golf course master plan, to include some fall projects, touch a little bit on the land sale, on what that looks like for us now without having that area over there, as well as the storage area. So Jim, how you doing on this hot August day?
Yeah, hot is the word today, and humid. I remember the last time we did this, or it was the first episode, I was wearing my signature hoodie, and we were sitting down on the patio, and it was quite comfortable. Today we're inside because I think real feels like 115 degrees out right now.
It's warm.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal.
We've got the white tablecloth in the banquet space, nice and cool, looking good. So.
Yeah, I told him when we sat down that he's taking a real risk with me wearing work clothes and the white tablecloth. We'll see if I get it dirty or not. So.
All right, well, hey, let's dive into green speed. I know you touched on that on our first episode. First off, I want to mention that the Greens and Grounds Committee implemented a KPI for green speed. I'm going to turn over to Jim and talk about that KPI, and he's going to walk us through how he takes measurements with the stimp meter, how often, what our target number is, and then some of the things he's been doing. You know, for me, since June 1st, the greens have really been very consistent. Our KPI numbers show that. You've talked about the aerification process on the first episode, and that's really coming into our plan like it did last year. So Jim, I'll turn it over to you, and you can touch on all kinds of stuff when it comes to green speed. I know you're passionate about it.
Oh boy, here we go. Strap in, everybody. So people that aren't familiar, KPI is a key performance indicator, right? And the board of directors has a dashboard of KPIs that they can kind of do a quick glance at and say, how are we doing over time? Just a small set of data that they can show that we're either improving or we're falling behind of our targets over time, which is a little easier for the business world if it's return on investment or equity or that sort of stuff. But the golf course condition is a whole lot more subjective. There's not quite as much that you can measure, but there are some things that we can measure. And so obviously the committee, I knew that we would eventually land at green speed as an indicator for how the golf course is performing. I had kind of anticipated that. So we kind of took our time in developing, what the KPI would look like. Historically, for Hyperion, per our standard operating procedures, the green speed optimum was defined as 10.5 feet. And that's really where it was left, and the leadership wanted to take it kind of a step further, because there's just really a lot of curiosity about what it is that we're shooting for, and so we worked on that collaboratively with the committee and the committee chairs and the board and Adam and Evan and the general, and ultimately we established a range for daily play, and we established a range that, hey, look, on any given day when we come to Hyperion, we should expect the greens to be between 10 and 11.5 feet. It's a pretty wide range, but if you think about it, on any given day you could have just any number of different weather conditions.
Weather plays a big part on green speed, and why don't you just spend a few minutes touching on that, and for the people that aren't familiar with turf and how fast grass grows and how fast it doesn't, just talk about a little bit of that, because I think some people might have some confusion on, it's a hot day, why aren't the greens as fast, So.
Yeah, so in my mind, the two biggest things that impact the speed are, maybe the frequency with which we're rolling the greens. The studies and all that sort of things show that the more often you roll, the quicker you'll be, and the more consistent, smoother, all those sorts of things. And the other thing is the rate at which the grass is growing. In the profession, they call that clipping yield, because we're asking a lot of a machine to mow grass at 1/10 of an inch. And so if it's growing really, really quickly and you've got a lot more material to harvest, that means more blades are getting missed by the mowers themselves. And those little blades, some of which are longer than others, are going to slow down the ball roll and lead the ball to not be taken quite as a true or straight of a path. So the rate of growth, obviously there's a myriad of other factors, height of cut and all that sort of stuff. But really it's the clipping yield or rate of growth that really impacts it. And that's really impacted really heavily by the weather. All of our nitrogen, fertilizer, all that sort of stuff that we put down to make the grass grow. Well, none of that really works without biology in the soil. There's bacteria in the soil that convert those products that we apply from this little prill into a soluble form that the plant takes up. And we get into periods of warmth and humidity, and the soil temperature starts to hit that optimum range for when the bacteria are really, really active and those nutrients all of a sudden release, and boom, the grass grows just at a phenomenal rate. Just think about your yard in late May, early June. I mean, you can mow it every other day. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of fight that natural physiology of the turf and its response to that growing environment, nutrient-rich release of nitrogen in the soil. And so the grass is growing so much more quickly in May and June than it is right now. So our clipping harvest is so much higher at other times of the year. That's why we moved the aerification. It's like we're going to struggle to get the speed because the grass is growing faster than we would like. So let's move the aeration then. We healed up a lot more quickly. Speeds are generally slower. And now we get to enjoy into September much more speed, much more enjoyable playing conditions without having the best part of the year interrupted by an aerification. Mm-hmm. So, that's kind of the short. Yeah, that's the short version.
I know. Like I said, you could go on and on about green speed and turf conditions, but just for our viewers that are watching on YouTube and for our listeners not, I just want to point out our averages for green speed. And Jim, why don't you touch on what does 10.5 feet mean, or 10 feet, or what is a step meter for some of our listeners that may not be familiar with that process?
Right. So the step meter is a data tool, data collection tool developed to help you make decisions, to keep track of your playing surface over time and what practices am I doing and how is that impacting how the course plays. Somewhere along the line, it got kind of changed into a tool for people to measure things and brag about things. But that's not what the tool was designed for or meant for. You get to the highest championship levels, the U.S. Opens, the Masters, those sorts of things. Well, they'll stimp each green each day to get to the highest level of consistency possible.
Wow.
Sometimes that may mean that they'll mow a green 2, 3, 4 times that's really, really struggling, or they may mow a green one time and not roll it for one that's more quick, than another one. And so the procedure that I use is I measure number 5 and number 14, and we'll take those measurements 3 to 4 times a week. Just kind of depends on what the weather's been like, how busy we are, what sort of fires pop up out on the course.
A few fires.
Yep, there's a machine that breaks down or whatever, and so we collect the readings 3 or 4 times a week, and I always do number 5 and I always do number 14. I try to do it at the same time of day. It's usually between 8 and 10 in the morning, kind of after we've had a chance to do our morning chores, mowing and rolling and that sort of stuff, just to try to be as consistent as we can. And really what those readings are telling me is it time to do a brush or a vertical mow? Perhaps we need to adjust our plant growth regulator applications. Those are the sorts of tools and levers that we pull, to use Mr. Sidwell's analogy. He likes to talk about pulling levers. We got a lot of different tools and levers that we can pull, and we take those readings, and are we short of where we want to be? Are we above where we want to be? What sort of adjustments do we need to make? And oh, by the way, can we make those adjustments? Like today, if we were well below where we wanted to be and it's going to be 115 degrees out, well, I'm not going to go out and lower the height of the mower and triple cut and double roll. So that's really not going to be conducive to long-term health of our greens. And we've got probably 6,000 or 8,000 rounds of golf left to go this year. So it's a decision tool. That's how we use it. Our KPI, we've got a range that we want to be within, but we want the average of those readings over the course of a month to fall between 10.5 and 11. And historically, we've been right at, if not right within, or maybe just above that number. Traditionally, June, it's right at that 10.5, maybe just above. July, we're hovering right in that range. August, we're towards the top end. Before September and into October, we have to be careful or we'll far exceed where we want to be. So, which everybody thinks is great and is fun, but when the greens get too fast, it gets quite challenging. And if we've got a day where we've got 230 people on the tee sheet, last thing we want is for the greens to be just incredibly dry, not holding the shots, and the ball's bouncing everywhere, and then the ball just rolling off the green.
Well, that gets into pace of play too. I know
Yeah.
it's not an issue, but over the last weekend, which was club championship, and into the previous week, you had the greens over 12 and a half. And, you get 12 and a half on the step meter with people out here that may not play every day or play as much as some of the people that do out here. It does slow pace of play down. So that's something that, we're always thinking about, because we are getting so many rounds of golf. Adam just told me through August 21st, we hit over 20,000 rounds.
Yeah.
So that was Monday. So anyway, just to touch on a little bit of the data, for 2023, for June, you were 10.81, so clearly within that range. July, 10.86. August, we're exceeding it, 11.16. And as Jim mentioned, we'll continue to see that number go up as we get into what I call the prime golf season is fall golf, which is such a nice time to play out here. So why don't we're talking about green speed. Let's talk about number one green. Some members may have noticed over the last 3 or 4 weeks, it's cleaned up significantly.
Month and a half.
Yeah, it's just been a little bit off color. That was Jim identified that as a nematode issue. So Jim, first of all, what is a nematode?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure I actually can answer that question. I know it's a little tiny soil microorganism, or a class of soil microorganisms resembling worms. What I understand is there literally is a nematode for every place and being on Earth, and we do have them within our soils, and generally they're beneficial little guys that break down organic matter, so dead plant tissue, and they convert that back into carbon and nutrients that our plants can then use. But there's a few of them that will parasitize or attack our turfgrass plants, specifically into the root zone. And there's about, 6 or 8 of them that will, parasitize our roots. And there's kind of 2 or 3 that are really problematic for us. And there's speculation. I never, growing up within this industry, really heard much about nematodes. And the speculation within the scientific community is that, a lot of those, nasty pesticides that were commonly used, in years and years past, containing heavy metals, have probably taken years and years and years and years to finally biodegrade out of our soils. And so the speculation is that, perhaps those populations are finally starting to rise where they otherwise normally would have been had those products not been used. The other side of the coin that other professors would argue is that the nematodes aren't really a problem. They're just kind of piggybacking on another issue. It's like the chicken and the egg. Well, is it your green struggling because you got too wet, you had too much rain and it got hot, or is it the nematodes that were the problem and the green struggled because the roots weren't quite as deep? So, they're these nasty little creatures.
Little guys.
Some of them, they'll like needle into the roots and rob nutrients. Some of them actually go into the roots themselves. And as I mentioned, the old chemistries that were really, really effective were rightfully so taken off the market, and the industry's starting to catch up with much better products that are a whole lot more safe for the environment. They are very much more specific as to which organisms they target, and don't affect. Um, the thing is, they're not quite as, because they are so specific, they're just not quite as effective against all the different kinds of nematodes. It just makes my job quite a bit harder. I shouldn't say harder. It makes me, requires that I know exactly which product to use for which problem that I'm having, and be able to use it at the right time in the right way to have, the desired effect. But yeah, we did see some decline in number one shortly after the 4th of July. And, with the experience that I have at Hyperion now, I've started to realize which ones are my indicator greens. Number one, number 7 are two that I really keep close tabs on, because just historically we just see a little bit of decline in those first. And so as soon as I start to see number 1 or 7 kind of look a little bit funny, a little bit off, then I'll start paying close attention to what's underground, start probing around and checking the roots. Identified a nematode problem, put out an application, and in my opinion, that the nematodes are in fact problematic for our roots. Is there's been twice in my career here that we've seen pretty significant decline in the health of our greens. We make these applications that are designed to reduce those parasite populations, and the greens really significantly improve in a short period of time during the middle of summer, when they should be under the most stress and shouldn't really get better, yet they do after those applications. So I'm convinced that they are problematic. The good news is we're on the road to recovery, and right now I think if you went to number 1, you'd be hard pressed to notice where the damage was. I can still see it. It takes a while to regain that turf density and vigor, but it's well on the road to recovery. And the good news is, if we can get through the next 2-3 days, that cooler weather should prevail.
Yes.
And it'll be a nice season for recovery for us out there. So
It's sure been hot. We've been doing so well this summer, it's been a very mild summer where we were due for a hot streak. Well, Jim, just want to compliment you and your team on the overall condition of the golf course. Following club championship, I spoke to a few members, and they couldn't say enough good things about how great it's been all year. And I know that's a common theme throughout the membership. So kudos to you guys. I know you guys, you deal with things like nematodes and, getting up early and making it all happen, but you guys do. So great job out of you and your team. And this heat will break hopefully by Friday, and you guys can kind of take a deep breath.
Yeah, the guys, they do a fantastic job. They take a lot of pride in Hyperion, and they're getting tired. The course is a little bit tired. We've played a lot of golf. We got a long ways to go, but they're hanging in there. They're taking care of not just the course but each other. So it's a good group. We're lucky to have them. So.
We are lucky. So let's kind of transition into the land sale. For those of you that haven't heard, we did close on the sale of 30 acres to Scott and Stephanie Denton of Denton Homes late last month. So with that, that was 30 acres of basically a dump area for us, that we had storage facilities over there, that we stored all kinds of different things. So there's things that we're going to have to do on over here more towards the clubhouse, at Jim's shop, maybe down below off the lower parking lot. So walk us through, Jim, on what are our requirements now that we don't have that area over there.
Yeah, so the biggest change is obviously the debris. We've got 110 acres over here, plus another 15 to 20 over at the range that we maintain. And a golf course just produces a lot of material every day in, day out. The trees are growing, the grass is growing, all the different plants are growing. And we all know what the trees do with shedding their leaves in the fall, and the kind of mess that creates, and you got to deal with that. But every day we're out here, there's just sticks and limbs and tree branches.
Twigs,
yep, all that sort of stuff just continues to fall. And historically, we would take all that sort of stuff over the driving range, and we would chip it up and put it in the ditch over there, and it would just obviously biodegrade and decompose over time. And so that's a major shift for us. Is now we have to we'll use as much of that as we can. We'll chip up and recycle as many of those wood chips as possible. We may look into getting a larger wood chipper in order to let us haul off less wood and convert more of that wood into wood chips and mulch that can be reused on the property. Um, you know, that area, we're going to have a place to store that stuff, because we're not just going to put tree branches and sticks and limbs into a dumpster and have it emptied every day. We'll have kind of a compost heap, and when it gets full, we'll have that trucked out and landfilled. So that's a big change for us. Before, we might handle whatever it is, a tree branch, once, because it would just disappear into the ravine, and that's the last time we would ever see it. Well, now we may handle that same debris 3 times. It's just going to be a little bit more labor intensive. Over at the range, we had those buildings that almost nobody probably ever even saw. They weren't much to look at, to be certain, but they were really valuable to us for a couple reasons. There's a lot of stuff that we use that's really bulky, like bulk fertilizer. It takes up a lot of room, and it just kind of sits around until you're ready to use it. There's a lot of machines that we just have to have, but we don't use them all that frequently.
Once or twice a year.
Yep, and so we put the stuff that's used infrequently, takes up a lot of space over in these ancillary buildings, as well as topsoil, divot sand. Being able to keep that sort of material dry was really, really beneficial for us. Even though it wasn't much of a shed, it kept our material dry, so that was
Called it the lean-to.
Yeah, it was a lean-to at best. But yeah, that's the sort of infrastructure that we got to replace, and part of the commitment from the builders, the Dentons, is to put another structure over there that we can use for range maintenance type equipment, divot sand, perhaps our top dressers and wood chippers and stuff that we don't use frequently, we can store over there. The other thing that we have to address is just the bulk material storage. So our sands, soils, where are we going to put those, and how are we going to keep some of those dry? We've looked at the shop up adjacent to number 8 as a potential. We've looked at maybe expanding our shop, and there's all sorts of implications when you start putting add-ons to buildings, city codes and whatnot. But ultimately, I think we'll probably put the bulk of our materials at the lower parking lot. I think is probably our prime candidate for all of our different sands, of which there's probably 4 different sands that we use for various reasons around here. That's really interesting stuff right there.
People got to hear it, right?
Topsoil, mulch, pea gravel. We got to have that sort of material on site, and so we'll probably store a lot of that down in the lower parking lot. And then the debris, the tree branches, limbs, sticks, rocks, stuff that the golf course produces, we'll store at the shop. And then when our storage gets full, we'll have it hauled out. So, it's just kind of a big shift in.
Yeah, it's a change for you and your staff.
How we operate. So.
What about a skid loader? I know you've talked about with
our
new requirements, we might need a new skid loader.
Yeah, our machine, it's a good little machine, but I don't know that it would reach over the top of the side of a dump truck, 1. 2, if you've ever run a skid loader and you reach up that high, you can't exactly see what you're doing all that well, and sometimes we have a tendency to tip it up too high, and all sorts of yummy smelling stuff falls back down on your lap, that's no good.
Right.
A, it's smelly, and B, it just isn't safe. So we need to go to a closed cab, something bigger.
Sure.
That can
maybe you can push snow too.
Yep, that can handle that debris operation. And the good thing with that is those enclosed cabs come air conditioned and heated. So because the price of everything is just so astronomical, that machine could obviously be used to push snow, kind of make that whole process a whole lot more efficient. So,
well, good. One thing I do want to point out to our listeners is on the purchase price of the property, the total purchase price was $1.5 million. 1.2 was for the land itself, and then the $300,000 was negotiated for all these requirements Jim mentioned, from skid loader to a bigger chipper to a golf course storage area for materials. So that was all built in because we knew we were going to have to do that. There'll be a few things at the range we'll have to put back together that are under our scope of work. So, but that was all in the agreement, as well as what Jim touched on, which is a huge savings, is they're building us a new storage facility for some of those items you talked about.
Yep.
And that'll be completed early next spring. So fortunate to have the Denton's commitment on that, and it's really all around a great deal for Hyperion, for Carmel Hyperion, which is the development. They did release the lots on their website, DentonHomesIowa.com. They have a detailed description of where each lot will be, how big each lot is, and for more information on that, reach out to Scott and Stephanie at Denton Homes. DentonHomesIowa.com. I know they're excited. They'll be breaking ground here in the next couple weeks. There will be obviously some disruption, but as I mentioned in the first podcast and in every communication that we sent out, functionality and accessibility of the range is of the highest importance to us as well as a Denton. So you will be able to hit balls. We'll probably move you to the east end here soon. I know we've got some plans for that west tee, to level that west tee. And as we talk about projects, when you talk golf course master plan, we actually have a driving range master plan, which we updated last year when we started this process with Scott and Stephanie. So I want to touch on the golf course master plan. That was a topic that a few members approached me after they listened to our first podcast. They're like, Evan, why don't you guys talk about the golf course master plan? So we're going to spend a few minutes here and talk about, what the Greens and Grounds Committee has been looking at and identifying all year, and then what projects we're going to accomplish this fall. We're fortunate to be in a very sound fiscal standpoint where we can, with some excess capital dollars, check some things off the list that we normally wouldn't be able to do on a normal year. But we're fortunate with full membership and great membership engagement and support of the club, we're able to do these things. So Jim, what about tee leveling? First of all, why do we level tees? How does that happen? How does a tee get unlevel? And then why do we need to level it, and how do we level it?
Well, it starts with the technology and the original construction. When these were built, most of these in the early 90s, late 80s, and some of them beyond, we didn't have the technology available, at least not to be applied to, a golf course that we do now. Now we have lasers and machines that will automatically change the level of the implement used to move the dirt around automatically, like you see the road graders and stuff building our bridges and highways. It's really amazing to see. So that technology is now available to us that really wasn't available before. And so the idea behind that is we take the sod off either by a sod cutter, or they've got what they call a phrase mower, which is kind of like a flail mower that chews up the grass and spits it out. But you remove the current surface, and then we rototill it to make it nice and loose. We set up the laser, which is kind of like a level. It spins a laser round and round and round on a perfectly level plane. And then they drive the machine around that has a blade underneath it that takes away material from a high spot and deposits it automatically in our low spots. And oh, by the way, we can set the correct pitch so that we have the right surface drainage. Typically, we like it to pitch right or left, because most players are right-handed, to favor a draw for us righties. And
for me.
we like it to pitch from back or front to back if we can. But the nicest thing about it is, so many of our tees have waves in them, or the sides are sloping off, to where we may place the tees, in a given area. It's got beautiful turf. Well, that area may be very, very wavy, and the guy setting the tees doesn't really notice that, but you go stand on it, and you really can't find a great place to tee up the ball. Or, there's several of them out there where the actual usable space, we're maintaining it as a tee, mowing it short, spraying all the different products on it, but you can't use it because it's the grade is like 4, 5, 6% falling off. So those are the things that we look to address. As far as the master plan goes, that effort to update that really came about in the discussion with the bunkers. Those old bunkers were so bad. It didn't matter what we would have done to them as far as the best liner and the best sands. If we left them the way they were with just new drain pipe and new sand, they'd be back to being awful. So the idea was we got to kind of just change this up a bit and, solve some of the bigger issues, which we did. And during that process, we identified a number of initiatives and stuff regarding the golf course. And boy, oh boy, did we have a lot of ideas.
No shortage of those.
we did some focus groups from all facets of the club: ladies, high handicap players, low handicap players, and really no idea was a bad idea. We put it all out there. I mean, all sorts of crazy stuff, totally rerouting the place, and ultimately, what we landed on was a handful of initiatives or priorities. The bunkers being one, par equity and the length of the course being another one. Trying to add length where we can, but we really identified that the course is really, really long for the forward tees, oftentimes the ladies players. So identifies a lot of areas where we have opportunities to shorten the course from the white tees. Some safety issues, because we are a pretty tight property. How do we reposition bunkers to kind of favor one side of a hole rather than the other? Never going to eliminate those risks, but perhaps we could sort of lessen the risk based on the strategy of the hole. We tried in Paul's design to add a little bit of intrigue, a little bit more strategy, rather than the back and forth. A lot of our par fours are straightaway back and forth, and they're all about the same yardage. So I'm trying to add a little bit more character, a little bit more strategy to some of those. Holes 2, 3, and 4. There's still an opportunity for us to do some fairway adjustments. Number 4 specifically, out of bounds is right there. So everybody tries to play it up the left-hand side. Well, why don't we shift everything just a little bit to the left, even if it's not that impactful specifically, what's 20 feet? Well, when you're standing on the tee, how does it feel? And, so much of sports, especially golf, is mental. How you feel when you're standing over the ball, I would argue, is probably more impactful than the 20 feet, whether it's here or there, grass, fairway, rough, whatever. So those are some of the things that we sought to do with that master plan. I was excited for our membership survey because, when we had kind of completed the bunker project, or at least solved for our really, really bad bunkers, the areas that I identified with general was, our tees being really, really sloped, unleveled, wavy, whatever you want to call it, as well as the lack of par equity. So I said, our tees are our next probably weakness that we need to address. Cart paths,
Yeah.
which we addressed a number of those, being the next thing, and then our landscaping in and around the tees, around the club. So those are the areas I wanted to attack, and then we did the survey, and lo and behold, those came back as priorities from the members. So it was really good to see, areas that we identified in the master plan as being opportunities for improvement with the areas that I thought were a priority, and then to have the members kind of come back with those same thoughts and notions was good. So the committee's been looking at, and they're actively looking at right now, what are our next priorities for tee boxes to level next? Where should we be adding tees? We have designs this year to put a forward tee on number 16. We've added that bunker, and part of that conversation was, this is a really, really difficult hole for some of the ladies, and now you're going to put a bunker in there. Well, the plan does call for a forward tee to now make it to where the ladies can hopefully reach the green in 2, because where they are now, there's a lot of ladies that, it takes them 3 to get to the green, right?
Same for many of our par fours. You touched on that earlier, but we're one of the longest courses at the white tees for our women in the state. So it's good that Paul Miller identified that was a priority, and now that we're making those some of those tee boxes a reality.
Yeah, and we just came from club championship weekend, and be careful about making too much of generalizations, but you had your men's club champion at 6 under, and the ladies was plus
18,
something like that. And I don't want to say one player is better than the other, but in my mind, that's kind of pointing to the par equity that we're talking about. How it may be a little bit more, a little bit easier for the men or the longer players than the ladies. So.
So what tees did the committee identify to level this fall, or potentially level? I know we've got some plans, but if you could briefly touch on that. I think that'd be
Yeah,
good.
a lot of discussion on number 8.
Mhm.
From my perspective, the shoulders or the sides don't fall off as bad as some other holes, but the committee has brought it to my attention just how wavy it is and how it's really, really difficult to find a nice spot where you feel comfortable standing over the ball. The black tee on number 5 is another one that's really bad. 16 is one that's of concern. The one that I would like to do is number 11. There's really discussion on pretty much every tee out here. Could use some attention, and really it's picking away at the worst ones, and then next year we'll get to the next ones. And the idea is over the course of several years to eventually get to all the tees and get them all leveled out. At the same time, we give consideration to the master plan, and if we've got a bigger project in 8 or 10, 12 years away that we need to do an irrigation system because it'll be 30 plus years old. Well, maybe it's number 5 or maybe it's number 4. Well, this is a really significant change. What the master plan calls for on this hole. So perhaps, the tee's not in the best shape, but is it okay to wait another 8 or 10 years and then we'll address it when we do the irrigation system? So those are the things that we're looking at with the committee is, what does it make sense to do now? What would be the most impactful improvements now versus, other improvements that'll be definitely impactful, but they're a big change, and does it make sense to kind of wait to do those and, have them be in concurrence with irrigation or a fairway shift and that sort of stuff. So
Good.
giving it careful thought, and I just enjoy seeing it.
Yeah,
A little gradual improvements
coming
all
to
the time.
reality. So just one more thing on the master plan. You talked about fairway shifting. You've already started some of that, correct, this week?
Yeah, I did number 1, number 16, and number 17. Number 1 I've been wanting to do for a number of years is bring the right-hand fairway bunker, bring the fairway closer to that, and have it have a little bit of a different look and feel. From the tee, essentially we're doing the same thing on 17, is we're bringing the fairway and wrapping it around that new bunker a little bit. In both cases, if you carry the bunker, have you land in the fairway and perhaps have that ball kick, down towards the green.
Get a good hop off that hill, and you might get down there.
Right. I think it might result in some people driving the green from time to time.
Potentially, yeah. North wind.
16, we're really enhancing the dog leg. That the turn to the left.
That's probably one of the most significant changes would be 16.
Yep, and so we've been mowing that area short for since about May, just to provide a little bit better lie. But now we've gone out and we've sprayed Roundup on those areas. That grass will be dying over the course of the next week. Probably by the end of this week and the first part of next week, you'll see us out there scalping that dying material off, and we'll be aerating it and seeding it. And with these soil temperatures that we're going to be getting out of this 110 degree weather, that grass seed's really going to jump out of the ground. I took the opportunity while we're in the area on number 16, we came across the approach. So in front of the green, on many of our greens and approaches, fairways, kind of that interface between the fairway and the green, we've got an abundance of Poa annua. So since we're in the area on number 16, I took the opportunity to come right across and kill off that approach, and we'll establish it with some bent grass that has a lot better genetics. It'll be a lot more uniform, require less water and that sort of thing. So took the opportunity to show you all what that process might look like and how quickly we can
It recovers.
Convert it in hopes that we would do more of them throughout the golf course in the future. So
Good. All right, Jim. Well, this has been great. I know we've been going for a while, but this is good information for our listeners to listen to, whether you're a member, a non-member, or just somebody interested in Hyperion. So just kind of want to wrap things up, touch on what the next month or so. We're recording this on August 23rd. We have the ladies member this Friday. You got Labor Day the following weekend with the couples golf and the Labor Day event. Then we really jump into some fun events when you're talking men's member. And then a new event this year I want to put a plug in. It's a mixed couples member. That's going to be Saturday, September 23rd. So that's a new event, fun format. Play with someone other than your spouse. And it is a member event, so it'll be a shootout as well. So we're hoping to get a good turnout on Saturday the 23rd. So get on 4Ts. The registration just opened. It's got all the details. Really fun event, a fun format too. So Golf Shop and myself, as well as the golf committee, are fired up about that. So Jim, I know we touched on it. Fall golf's right around the corner. Best time of year to play. Beautiful time out here at Hyperion when the leaves start to change, and crisp mornings, and warm afternoons, and crisp evenings. So anything else, Jim, on your end? I know I've learned a lot today, and I hope our listener has.
Hopefully you're able to follow some of the
some
of the notions that I have there. But yeah, looking forward to seeing everybody out there in September and October. It's my favorite time of year. Very conducive to firm and fast playing conditions. So it'll be the Hyperion experience for sure coming here in September. So
without a doubt,
when you start seeing that 48, 49, 50-degree number in the overnight low, you can anticipate that the greens will be zipping during that season. So
good. Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks everybody for listening, watching on YouTube. We'll be back in the next couple weeks with episode 4 of What's the Hype.